Life was supposed to be good. We had it all: a nice house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, 2 wonderful kids, and careers we loved. Sarah, my wife of 12 years, was a dedicated elementary school teacher, the kind kids made crayon-drawn cards for at the end of the year. I was an interior designer, one of the best in the city. My work had been featured in magazines and I had clients lined up for months. From the outside looking in, we were the kind of family people envied. Perfect. Or at least that's what I thought. The first cracks in our marriage weren't obvious, not at first. Sarah started staying late at work more often. She claimed it was forced school meetings or lesson planning. It wasn't unusual, teaching isn't a 9-to-5 gig, but it started to feel off. Her tone was different when she'd make these excuses, her voice a little too light, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Then there was the way she guarded her phone, always keeping it screened down on the counter or slipping it into her bag the moment I entered the room. I didn't want to be that guy, suspicious of my own wife, but something about her behavior gnawed at me. The first real blow came on a Sunday afternoon. The kids were out with Sarah and I was straightening up the living room. Among a pile of receipts on the coffee table was one from our favorite restaurant, the upscale Italian place where we went to celebrate birthdays and anniversaries. But this receipt wasn't ours. The date on it didn't match any occasion I could recall. And it wasn't for a big group, it was clearly a dinner for 2. My stomach dropped. She told me she had a staff meeting that night. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. But then I noticed other little things. Sarah started buying new clothes. Nothing too fancy, just little upgrades to her wardrobe. She started wearing perfume more often, even when she claimed she'd just be staying late to grade papers. One night, when I hugged her after she came home, I caught a faint scent of cologne on her jacket. Not mine. Then there was Todd. Todd had moved in 3 months earlier. He was our new neighbor, freshly divorced and radiating charm like some Hallmark movie protagonist. Todd was the kind of guy who could have made a fortune as a model for outdoor gear catalogs. Rugged, tall, with perfectly tousled hair and a perpetual tan. He introduced himself with a plate of cookies and that easy, disarming smile of his. I didn't think much of it at first. Sarah and I even joked about how picture-perfect he seemed, calling him Mr. Perfect Neighbor. But it didn't take long for Todd to become a regular presence in our lives. Too regular. He'd come over just to borrow a tool or offer to help with yard work. He was always friendly, always helpful, but his timing was suspiciously good. If Sarah was outside, Todd would appear, shirt off and lawn mower conveniently in hand. He'd invite her over to check out his new patio furniture or share some grilled steaks because he made too much. I wasn't blind. I noticed the way Sarah's face lit up when Todd was around. She'd laugh at his jokes, brush her hair back in that nervous little way she used to do when we first started dating. And I noticed how she started spending more time outside when Todd was home, conveniently watering plants that didn't need watering or taking out the trash when it wasn't full. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It grew worse when Sarah began missing bedtime routines with the kids. She'd claim she had to stay late for work, but she never brought home grading or lesson plans. Instead, she'd waltz in hours later, makeup still flawless, a faint whiff of wine lingering in the air. One night, while she was at school, I decided to dig deeper. I felt disgusting for even considering it, but something didn't add up. Her laptop was locked, but her browser history wasn't. There it was, a search for best romantic restaurants near me. And worse, Google Maps directions to Todd's house. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, my hands shaking. I wanted to be wrong. God, I wanted this to be some kind of misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew. I spent the next few days in a daze, watching, waiting. I started noticing more inconsistencies, her phone buzzing late at night, quickly silenced. Todd's truck parked too close to our driveway when I got home early from work. My heart told me to confront her, to shout and demand answers. But my head told me to wait. If I was going to accuse her, I needed undeniable proof. So I bought a hidden camera. It was small, discreet, and easy to set up, tucked neatly into the decorative clock I'd designed for our living room. The irony didn't escape me. I told myself it was just to rule out my fears, to stop my mind from spiraling. But a part of me already knew what I'd find. The footage confirmed everything. The first time I saw it, I thought I might be sick. Sarah and Todd, in my house, on my couch, laughing and sharing a bottle of wine like they didn't have a care in the world. Then as the minutes ticked by, they moved closer. Her hand on his knee. His fingers brushing her hair. Their lips meeting. I couldn't watch the rest. I sat there in the dark, staring at the paused video. My chest felt like it was caving in, a mix of anger, betrayal, and a hollow ache I couldn't describe. I wanted to scream, to break something, to drive to Todd's house and put him in the hospital. But then I thought about my kids. About what would happen if I let this rage control me. The next morning, Sarah kissed me goodbye like nothing had happened. "Love you," she said, grabbing her coffee as she headed out the door. My stomach churned. That's when I decided I wouldn't confront her. Not yet. She'd betrayed me, but I wasn't about to let her take my dignity. Instead, I channeled my anger into something else. Something smarter. Todd wanted to play house with my wife? Fine. But he'd learned soon enough that there were consequences. Todd had been bragging for weeks about selling his house and starting fresh in another state. He needed to keep his squeaky clean image intact to get the best offers. And I, of all people, could help with that. After all, staging homes was part of my job. If Todd thought his life was picture perfect now, he was in for a rude awakening. The next few days were agonizing. Every time Sarah smiled at me, every time she kissed my cheek or called me honey, I felt like screaming. I didn't want to believe that the woman I'd built a life with could betray me so easily. But then I'd remember the video, and the anger would return, sharper and colder than before. I buried myself in work, redesigning kitchens, offices, and living rooms for clients who had no idea I was barely holding it together. Sarah's betrayal had gutted me, but I wasn't about to let it ruin my career. If anything, the work gave me focus. And it gave me time to plan. Todd had no idea what was coming. One evening as I watered the lawn, Todd strolled over, beer in hand, flashing that confident grin of his. "Hey Mike," he said, leaning casually against the fence. "Think you could give me some advice on the house? I'm looking to sell soon and well, you've got the magic touch." I gritted my teeth behind a polite smile. The audacity of this man. But I nodded. "Sure, Todd. Staging's kinda my thing. I'd be happy to help." He grinned wider, clinking his beer bottle against mine like we were old pals. "I knew I could count on you." Later that night I finalized my plan. Todd thought I was going to make his house irresistible to buyers. He had no idea I was about to turn it into a circus act. The next week I stopped by Todd's house under the guise of a friendly walkthrough. Sarah was at work, the kids were at school, and Todd was all too eager to show me around. The house itself was beautiful. Classic hardwood floors, spacious rooms, and that open concept style everyone seems to love these days. "It's a great space," I said, walking through the living room. "But if you really want top dollar, we'll need to make it feel more unique." Todd raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Unique, huh?" "Trust me," I said, flashing him a grin. "People love a house with personality." Over the next 2 weeks, I spent hours staging Todd's home. I filled it with quirky, cheap items, things that looked out of place but were subtle enough to pass as intentional. A faux Victorian portrait of a woman holding a raccoon hung in the dining room. In the kitchen, I swapped his sleek stainless steel utensils for mismatched, gaudy thrift store finds. I placed plastic fruit in his centerpiece bowl, including a bright blue banana. The piece de resistance was a framed print in the master bedroom. A dramatic painting of a shirtless Fabio-type man riding a unicorn under a full moon. Todd loved it. "You've got an eye for this stuff, Mike," he said one afternoon as I adjusted the raccoon portrait. "The place looks incredible." I bit back a laugh. "Glad you like it?" But I wasn't done. On the morning of Todd's open house, I slipped into his office while he was out running errands. He'd left his laptop open on the desk, an amateur mistake. I inserted a flash drive loaded with the footage of him and Sarah, set it to autoplay and muted the volume. Then I minimized the window, ensuring it would only take a single curious click to expose his dirty laundry. By the time Todd returned, I was already back home, sipping coffee and watching through the blinds as potential buyers filed into his house. From where I sat, the open house seemed to be going smoothly at first. Guests roamed the property, chatting and nodding approvingly at the staged decor. I almost felt bad for the poor real estate agent who would have to explain the raccoon portrait to serious buyers. And then the laptop came into play. It must have been one of the guests, probably a nosy type, the kind who opens every drawer and clicks every file. Whatever the case, I knew the exact moment they stumbled upon the video. Through the open window, I heard a gasp, followed by hurried whispers and the unmistakable sound of someone trying to close a laptop too late. My heart raced as I imagined the scene unfolding in Todd's office. Within minutes, the guests began trickling out, their expressions ranging from amused to disgusted. Some whispered behind their hands, others shook their heads as they passed Todd, who stood by the door, oblivious. But the best part? Among the guests was Todd's ex-wife, Paula. I didn't know she'd be there. I hadn't planned for it. But when I saw her storm out of the house, red-faced and clutching her phone, I couldn't suppress a grin. Karma had impeccable timing. That night, Todd showed up at my door livid. "What the hell happened today, Mike?" he demanded, his voice shaking with anger. I feigned confusion. "What do you mean?" "My open house was a disaster," he shouted. "Someone leaked a video, something personal, and now everyone thinks I'm a joke." I tilted my head, pretending to piece it together. "A video? Of what?" Todd hesitated, his face flushing. "Just stuff. Private stuff." "Well, that's awful," I said, my tone dripping with fake sympathy. "Who would do something like that?" Todd stared at me, his jaw clenched. For a moment I thought he might connect the dots. But then he shook his head, muttering something about hackers and nosy guests before storming off. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within days, clips from the video had been uploaded to TikTok, going viral under hashtags like #neighborhooddrama and #ToddScandal. Todd's reputation as a respectable real estate professional was in shambles. His house sat on the market with no offers, and Sarah began acting jumpy, likely fearing her part in the video might surface. I didn't feel triumphant, not exactly. But for the first time in weeks I didn't feel powerless. Todd had underestimated me and Sarah. Well, she'd learn her lesson soon enough. This was only the beginning. In the days following Todd's disastrous open house, a storm began brewing. It wasn't just Todd's career that took a hit, Sarah was starting to crack too. She hadn't said anything directly, but I could feel the tension rolling off her like a bad perfume. She was quieter than usual, her smiles forced, and her phone, her lifeline, stayed glued to her hand. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Every time she opened her mouth to say something, I could see the hesitation in her eyes, like she was weighing whether or not to come clean. She never did. Instead, she'd retreat into another room, her voice low as she took calls, or she'd suddenly remember an errand and leave for an hour. I let her squirm. Meanwhile, Todd's life was falling apart in real time. The TikTok video of him and Sarah was gaining traction faster than anyone could have predicted. Within a week, it had over 1 million views. Some of the comments were brutal. "So this is why house prices are insane. Your real estate agent's busy smashing the neighbors?" Plot twist. The husband's probably filming the sequel right now. The raccoon painting is the real victim here. Todd tried damage control, posting a vague apology on social media about personal struggles and misjudgments. It didn't help. The comments were ruthless, with people linking back to the video and dissecting every second of it. The internet has no mercy. Even Sarah wasn't spared. A few eagle-eyed viewers had pieced together that the woman in the video wasn't Todd's ex-wife but his married neighbor. They didn't know her name yet, but it was only a matter of time. One afternoon as I worked from home, Sarah came into my office looking pale. "Mike, have you heard about Todd?" she asked, her voice trembling. I glanced up from my laptop, feigning ignorance. "What about him?" She hesitated, wringing her hands. "There's a video going around. It's bad." "Oh?" I said, leaning back in my chair. "What kind of video?" Her face flushed and she looked away. "Just personal stuff. People are being awful about it." I raised an eyebrow. "Wow, that sucks for him." She flinched, and for a moment, I thought she might crack and confess. Instead, she muttered something about needing to make a call and scurried out of the room. That evening, the kids were in bed and I was sitting in the living room nursing a beer. Sarah was on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. She hadn't touched her wine. It was rare to see her like this, so visibly rattled. "Mike," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Do you think people can move past mistakes?" I tilted my head, studying her. "Depends on the mistake. Some things you can work through. Others? Not so much." She swallowed hard. "But, if someone made a mistake and regretted it, you'd at least hear them out, right?" I let her words hang in the air, the tension thick between us. Finally I said, "I guess it depends on whether they were sorry because they hurt someone, or because they got caught." Her face crumpled. She stood abruptly, muttering something about being tired, and disappeared upstairs. I didn't follow her. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened TikTok. The comments section under Todd's video was buzzing, with new rumors about the woman in the clip. People were digging, piecing together clues. It wouldn't be long before someone recognized Sarah. The next morning I got a call from Todd. "Mike," he said, his voice tight, "I need to talk to you. Can you come over?" I almost laughed. The nerve of this guy. "Sure, Todd," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Be there in 10. When I arrived, Todd looked like hell. His usually perfect hair was a mess and he had dark circles under his eyes. He waved me inside, closing the door quickly behind me. "Man, I don't know how this happened," he started, pacing the living room. "That video, it's destroying me." My clients are backing out, my ex is threatening to take me to court, and now people are sniffing around trying to figure out who the woman is. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. That's rough, Todd. Really rough. He stopped pacing and looked at me, desperation in his eyes. You don't think Sarah had anything to do with this, do you? The audacity. I fought to keep my expression neutral. Why would Sarah be involved? I don't know, he stammered. Maybe she mentioned something to someone and it got out of hand. You know how people gossip? I stared at him, letting the silence stretch until he started squirming. Finally I said, Sarah's not the gossiping type, Todd. Sounds like your mess to clean up. His face fell and he sank onto the couch, head in his hands. This can't be happening, he muttered. I worked so hard to rebuild after Paula and now this. Life comes at you fast, I said, clapping him on the shoulder. Anyway, I've got to get going. Good luck with everything. I left him there, stewing in his misery, and walked home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The next bombshell dropped 2 days later. Someone had recognized Sarah in the video and posted about it online. Within hours, her name was trending locally, along with our neighborhood. By the time Sarah came home from work, she was a wreck. Mike, she said, tears streaming down her face. They know. People at school are whispering. Parents are giving me these looks. I don't know what to do. I stared at her, my expression unreadable. Maybe you should have thought about that before you brought Todd into our house. Her sobs turned to gasps and she clutched at my arm. Mike, please. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I made a mistake, a horrible mistake, but I need you to help me fix this. Please. I pulled away, standing up and looking down at her. You didn't just make a mistake, Sarah. You made a choice. Over and over again. She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I left her there, walking upstairs to check on the kids. That night, as I lay awake in the guest room, I finalized my next steps. Todd was already a pariah, his reputation in ruins. Now it was Sarah's turn to feel the consequences of her choices. The divorce papers were ready. All I had to do was file them. But first I had one last card to play. After that night, things were different. Sarah stopped trying to hide her nerves, her usual calm and cheerful demeanor replaced by anxiety and exhaustion. Every time her phone buzzed, she flinched. I'd catch her glancing at me during dinner or avoiding my eyes altogether when I asked how her day went. The walls were closing in and we both knew it. The viral video wasn't just a local scandal anymore. It had caught fire. Blogs and even small news outlets started picking up the story, spinning it into clickbait headlines. Real estate agent's affair goes public in viral TikTok scandal. The comments were a mix of cruel jokes, outrage, and morbid curiosity. People wanted to know more about the mystery woman. They didn't have to wait long. Someone, maybe one of Todd's old clients, maybe a neighbor with too much time on their hands, connected the dots. They shared photos of Sarah and me from our social media accounts, pairing them with stills from the video. Within hours, her name was trending in our city, and our quiet little neighborhood had become ground zero for gossip. Sarah tried to keep up appearances, heading to work every morning like nothing had happened. But the whispers followed her. Parents started pulling their kids from her class, demanding meetings with the principal. One mother even approached her in the parking lot, shouting about setting a bad example for children. She came home that day looking like a ghost, her face pale, her hands trembling as she dropped her bag on the counter. Mike, she said, her voice breaking. I don't know how much more of this I can take. I sipped my coffee, keeping my tone neutral. What do you want me to say, Sarah? That it'll all blow over? That people will forget? Because I don't think they will. Her lip quivered, and for a moment I thought she might argue. Instead, she shook her head and walked away. Meanwhile, Todd was spiraling. His house was still on the market, but no one was biting. Every time he tried to host another open house, gawkers would show up, pretending to be interested just to snap selfies with the now infamous raccoon portrait. And Paula, his ex-wife, wasn't letting up either. She'd hired a lawyer to revisit their divorce settlement, claiming the video had brought new information to light. Todd had mentioned wanting a fresh start, but judging by the way he slumped around the neighborhood these days, that start seemed further away than ever. One afternoon as I mowed the lawn, Todd appeared at the edge of his driveway, a beer in hand. He looked rough, like he hadn't slept in days. Mike, he called out, waving me over. I killed the engine and walked over, keeping my expression blank. What's up, Todd? He hesitated, then let out a bitter laugh. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I raised an eyebrow. Enjoying what? This, he said, gesturing vaguely. My life going up in flames. Don't act like you don't know what's been going on. I crossed my arms, leaning against the fence. You think I'm behind your little PR nightmare? Aren't you? His voice cracked, frustration and desperation bleeding through. I don't know how, but I can feel it. This doesn't just happen, Mike. I smiled, slow and deliberate. Sometimes, Todd, people just get what's coming to them. His face darkened, but before he could say another word, I turned and walked back to my mower. Let him stew. Later that evening, I went upstairs to check on the kids. They were playing a board game, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. It was a relief to see them happy, untouched by the chaos swirling around us. I kissed them goodnight and headed to the guest room where I'd been sleeping for weeks now. Sarah was waiting for me at the door. Can we talk? She asked, her voice small. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. About what? About everything, she said, her eyes pleading. Mike, I know I've hurt you. I know I've made mistakes, but I need you to understand. I cut her off, my voice cold. Stop calling them mistakes, Sarah. A mistake is leaving the stove on. What you did was a choice. Over and over again. Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't back down. You chose Todd. You chose to bring him into our house. You chose to lie to me, to our kids. And now you want me to understand? I shook my head. What exactly do you think I'm supposed to understand? She broke down, sobbing into her hands. For a moment, I felt a flicker of guilt, but it passed quickly. I stepped around her and into the guest room, closing the door behind me. The next day I met with my lawyer. The divorce papers were ready, but there were still details to finalize. Custody arrangements, property division, all the logistical nightmares that come with ending a marriage. I wanted full custody of the kids. Sarah was already losing her footing at work, and I wasn't about to let her instability affect them. My lawyer was confident. Given the circumstances, I don't think she'll fight you on this. The evidence is damning. It was. The hidden camera footage, the viral video, the whispers in the community. Sarah's reputation was in tatters and she knew it. That evening, as Sarah put the kids to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of documents. When she came downstairs, I slid them across the table toward her. Her eyes widened as she realized what they were. Mike, she whispered, her voice trembling. You're divorcing me? I nodded. You made your choices, Sarah. Now I'm making mine. She sat down, her hands shaking as she flipped through the papers. But, the kids. What about the kids? They'll be fine, I said firmly. I'll make sure of it. She looked up at me, desperation in her eyes. I'll lose everything. I met her gaze, unflinching. You should have thought about that before you threw it all away. For a moment, she just stared at me, her face crumpling as the reality sank in. Then she stood, clutching the papers to her chest, and walked away without another word. As I sat there, the weight of it all finally hit me. The betrayal, the lies, the months of pretending everything was fine. It was over. There was no going back. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The days after handing Sarah the divorce papers were heavy with tension. She hadn't signed them yet, but her defeat was written all over her face. She moved around the house like a shadow, quieter than I'd ever seen her. The kids noticed something was wrong, but I kept up appearances, throwing myself into their routines, making breakfast, helping with homework, and playing games with them before bed. They needed stability, and I was determined to give it to them. But Sarah? She was unraveling. The viral video had done more than ruin her reputation at work. It was like a grenade had gone off in her social life. Friends who used to call her every day stopped answering her texts. The moms from school events, the ones who used to laugh at her jokes and share glasses of wine at PTA meetings, were avoiding her like the plague. One morning she came back from the grocery store with tears in her eyes. I didn't ask what happened, I didn't need to. She'd probably run into someone who couldn't resist an icy glare or a passive-aggressive comment. This was our small-town suburbia. Word spread fast and people loved a scandal. She tried to talk to me a few times, usually late at night when the kids were asleep. Each time I shut her down with the same calm resolve. There's nothing to talk about, Sarah. The papers are on the table. Her responses ranged from anger to pleading. Mike, please. Don't do this. We can fix it. For the kids. Every time I told her the same thing. You should have thought about the kids before you brought Todd into our home. Speaking of Todd, he wasn't doing much better. His house was still on the market, but the only people showing up to his open houses were there for the spectacle. The raccoon painting had become a meme at this point. People started tagging photos of it with captions like, "When the art matches the man, and this raccoon didn't choose this chaos." To make matters worse, Paula, Todd's ex-wife, had stepped up her campaign to make his life hell. She'd filed for sole custody of their kids, citing the scandal as evidence that he was unfit. Todd wasn't just losing his career, he was losing everything. One evening as I was grilling burgers in the backyard, Todd poked his head over the fence. He looked worse than ever, unshaven, his eyes bloodshot. "Mike," he said, his voice hoarse, "can we talk?" I didn't look up from the grill. "What's there to talk about, Todd?" "Come on, man," he said, stepping closer. "I know you're pissed. I get it. But we're neighbors, for God's sake. We've got to move past this." I finally looked at him, my expression flat. "Move past this? You slept with my wife, Todd. In my house. Forgive me if I'm not eager to move past that." He held up his hands, palms out. "I'm not saying I was right. I screwed up, okay? But this," he gestured toward his house, "this is too much. I can't even go to the grocery store without people whispering behind my back." "Welcome to the club," I said, flipping a burger. "Maybe next time, think twice before you screw over your neighbors." He stood there for a moment, his jaw working like he wanted to say more. Then he turned and walked back to his house, muttering under his breath. A week later, Sarah finally signed the divorce papers. She left them on the counter with a note: "We can co-parent. Please don't take them away from me." I folded the note and slid it into my pocket without a word. I didn't need to read it again to know what it said. I wasn't heartless. I knew she loved the kids. But love wasn't enough. I'd seen what betrayal could do, and I wasn't about to let her instability bleed into their lives. I filed the papers the next day. Once the divorce was official, things started moving fast. I kept the house, which was only fair since I'd bought it before we got married. Sarah moved into a small rental across town. It wasn't much, just a 2-bedroom townhouse, but it was what she could afford. She took some of the furniture, mostly stuff I didn't care about, and left quietly one Saturday morning while the kids were at a friend's house. When they came home and saw her gone, they asked questions. I told them the truth, or at least a version of it. "Mommy and I are living in different houses now, but we both love you very much." Lily, my oldest, was the most perceptive. "Is it because Mommy did something bad?" she asked, her big brown eyes full of worry. I knelt in front of her, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, Lily. Big ones. But that doesn't mean they stop loving their kids." She nodded, but I could tell she understood more than I wanted her to. With Sarah gone, the house felt lighter, quieter. I threw myself into work, taking on bigger projects and expanding my client base. But I didn't just bury myself in my career. I started something new, a blog. It started as a way to vent, to process everything I'd been through. I called it Creative Revenge, and I wrote about my experiences with Todd, Sarah, and the chaos that followed. I left out names and specific details to keep it anonymous, but the stories were raw and real. To my surprise, the blog took off. People loved the blend of humor and catharsis, and before I knew it, Creative Revenge had thousands of followers. I even monetized it, selling ad space and starting a Patreon. It wasn't about the money though. It was about taking control of my story, about turning my pain into something productive. One evening, months after Sarah moved out, I sat on the porch, sipping a beer while the kids played in the yard. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the neighborhood. My phone buzzed, a notification from TikTok. Someone had tagged me in a post. I opened it and found a clip of Todd's house, now up for rent instead of sale. The caption read, "Raccoon Manor, now available for your drama-free dreams." I laughed long and hard. It felt good to laugh again. As the kids ran up to me, breathless and smiling, I realized something. I'd lost a lot in the past year, my marriage, my trust, the life I thought I had. But I'd gained something too. Freedom. Perspective. And, most importantly, the unwavering love of my kids. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine. Once Sarah moved out and the dust started to settle, the days slowly fell into a routine. I'd wake up early to get the kids ready for school, pancakes on Mondays, cereal on the rushed mornings, and eggs when I was feeling ambitious. I was learning to balance being a single dad with running a successful design business, and while it wasn't easy, it was rewarding in ways I hadn't expected. The house felt different now. Not just because Sarah wasn't there, but because I had started to make it my own again. Gone were the little touches that once screamed her, like the floral curtains in the living room and the framed inspirational quotes she'd hung in the hallway. I replaced them with bold, clean designs that felt like me. It wasn't just a house anymore, it was home again. The blog, Creative Revenge, became a surprising outlet. At first, I had kept the tone light and humorous, focusing on the absurdities of the situation. I wrote about staging Todd's house with the raccoon painting and the Fabio on a unicorn masterpiece, weaving the tale of how it all came crashing down during the infamous open house. Readers loved it. Comments poured in from people sharing their own tales of betrayal and revenge, turning the blog into an unexpected community. But as time went on, the blog started to shift. I found myself writing less about the revenge and more about what came after: rebuilding, finding peace, and raising my kids in the aftermath of chaos. Surprisingly, people connected with that too. One morning, I woke up to an email from a literary agent. They'd read the blog and thought it had potential as a book. I stared at the email, half convinced it was a scam. But after a few calls and a lot of back and forth, it became clear they were serious. "Your story has everything," the agent said. "Heartbreak, humor, redemption. It's relatable. People need to hear it." The idea of turning my pain into something tangible, something that could help others, felt right. I agreed to give it a shot. Meanwhile, Sarah was struggling to find her footing. The fallout from the video had forced her to leave her teaching job. The whispers from parents and colleagues became too much, and the administration strongly suggested she resign. She ended up taking a part-time job at a tutoring center across town. It wasn't much, but it was something. We didn't talk much outside of co-parenting logistics, but I could see the toll it was taking on her. She'd show up to pick up the kids looking worn down, her smile forced as she waved to me from the car. I didn't revel in her misery, I wasn't that kind of person, but I also didn't feel sorry for her. She had made her choices. The kids adjusted surprisingly well. Lily, my oldest, took on the role of unofficial peacemaker, always checking on her little brother and trying to make everyone laugh. Ethan, my youngest, clung to me more than usual, but I didn't mind. If anything, their resilience inspired me. One evening, a few weeks after the divorce was finalized, Sarah asked to meet for coffee. I hesitated but agreed. We met at a small cafe halfway between our homes, the kind of place we used to go to on lazy Sunday mornings. She looked different, older maybe, or just tired. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, her voice soft. I nodded. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated, tracing patterns on the rim of her coffee cup. "I just wanted to apologize." "Really apologize?" I leaned back, folding my arms. "Go on." She took a deep breath. "I know I've said sorry before, but I don't think I ever truly owned up to what I did. I hurt you, Mike. I hurt our family. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life." Her words hung in the air between us. For the first time they felt genuine. "I can't change what I did," she continued, her eyes glistening with tears. "But I want you to know that I'm trying to be better, for the kids and for myself." I studied her for a moment. "I appreciate that," I said finally. "But it doesn't change where we are now. The damage is done." "I know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I just needed to say it." After that meeting, things between us improved slightly. We weren't friends, far from it, but the co-parenting exchanges became less tense. She started making more of an effort with the kids, picking them up on time and showing up to their events. It didn't erase what she had done, but it was something. The blog continued to grow, and so did the idea of the book. I started working with the literary agent, pulling together stories from the blog and fleshing them out into a cohesive narrative. Writing became a form of therapy, a way to process everything I had been through and make sense of the chaos. As the months passed, I began to notice something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. One Saturday morning, while the kids were at Sarah's, I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood. It was the first time in a while that I felt like I could breathe, like the weight of everything wasn't pressing down on my chest. As I passed Todd's house, I saw a moving truck parked in the driveway. Todd himself was loading boxes into the back, his movements sluggish and defeated. He spotted me and hesitated, then gave me a curt nod. "Leaving town?" I asked, stopping at the edge of his driveway. He wiped sweat from his brow and nodded. "Yeah. Figured it's time for a fresh start." "Good idea," I said evenly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Todd let out a bitter laugh. "You know, Mike, I don't think I'll ever live this down." "That's the thing about consequences," I said, my tone calm. "They tend to stick with you." He didn't reply, just turned back to the truck. I watched him for a moment longer, then walked away, feeling a strange sense of closure. That night, as I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey watching the stars, my phone buzzed with a new notification. The literary agent had emailed me, saying a publisher was interested in the book. I smiled to myself, taking a slow sip of whiskey. The life I'd built with Sarah was gone, but from its ashes I was building something new, something stronger, something mine. Life was finally starting to feel normal, or as close to normal as it could after the year I'd had. The house was quiet without Sarah, but it was peaceful too. The chaos that had followed her affair and the fallout from the viral video had left me feeling raw and exposed, but now, for the first time in a long time, I felt steady. The kids were thriving, which was my biggest relief. Lily had fully embraced her role as the big helper, and Ethan's energy seemed endless, always dragging me into some new project. "Daddy, let's build a treehouse," he'd said one weekend, his face lighting up with excitement. It was a ridiculous idea, considering I'd never built more than IKEA furniture, but how could I say no? By the end of the weekend, we had a lopsided but sturdy structure in the backyard, complete with a small sign Lily painted, "Fort Awesome." The kids loved it. And for me it felt like a metaphor, a fresh start built with my own hands. Sarah was still navigating her new life. She'd managed to keep her tutoring job, and I heard through the grapevine that she was trying to rebuild her social circle. It wasn't easy. The stigma of the scandal followed her everywhere. The once popular PTA mom was now the whispered about ex-teacher. She was making an effort with the kids, though. She showed up to every soccer game and school play, cheering louder than anyone else. I didn't say much when we crossed paths, just the polite nods and brief exchanges necessary for co-parenting. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was civility. The kids seemed to sense the shift. One day Lily asked me, "Do you still hate Mommy?" The question caught me off guard. I knelt down to her level, choosing my words carefully. "Lily, I don't hate Mommy. I'm just hurt by what happened. But that doesn't mean you have to feel the same way." She nodded slowly, her young mind processing far more than I expected. "Do you think you'll ever be friends again?" I didn't have the heart to tell her no, so I just said, "We'll always work together to take care of you and Ethan. That's what matters." The blog, Creative Revenge, had gone from a side project to a full-blown success. People weren't just reading it, they were sharing it, commenting, emailing me their own stories of betrayal and resilience. It was humbling and, honestly, a little overwhelming. The book deal was moving forward too. I'd spent countless late nights writing, revising, and going over edits with my agent. The process was exhausting but also invigorating. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my narrative, turning the darkest chapter of my life into something meaningful. One night, as I worked on a particularly tricky chapter, my phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. It was a private message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Kate, an old friend from college. We'd lost touch after graduation, but seeing her name brought back a flood of memories. I hesitated for a moment before opening the message. "Hey Mike, I've been following your blog and I just wanted to say, wow. What you've been through, how you've handled it, it's incredible. I'm not sure if you even remember me, but I thought I'd reach out." I smiled, typing a quick reply. "Of course I remember you, Kate. Thanks for reading, it means a lot. How have you been?" Her response came quickly, and before I knew it, we were catching up like no time had passed. She told me about her career as a graphic designer, her move back to the area, and her recent breakup. I told her about the kids, the blog, and my new normal. We ended up talking for hours, and by the time I went to bed I felt lighter. Over the next few weeks, Kate and I started texting regularly. At first it was just casual, friendly conversations. Memes, random observations, updates on our lives. But soon there was something more. She was thoughtful, funny, and easy to talk to. And for the first time since my marriage fell apart, I felt a spark, something I thought I'd lost for good. One evening she invited me out for coffee. "Just as friends," she said, but her tone hinted at the possibility of something more. I agreed and we met at a cozy little cafe downtown. Seeing her again after all these years was surreal. She looked the same but different, more confident, more self-assured. We talked for hours, laughing about old college memories and swapping stories about our lives now. At one point, she reached across the table and placed her hand on mine, her eyes full of warmth. "Mike," she said softly, "I know you've been through a lot. And I don't want to rush anything, but I've missed having you in my life." My heart raced, and for the first time in months I allowed myself to hope. "I've missed you too," I said, my voice steady but full of meaning. Things with Kate progressed slowly, and I was grateful for her patience. She understood that I needed time to heal, to find my footing before diving into anything serious. But with every coffee date, every late-night phone call, I felt more like myself, like the man I used to be before Sarah's betrayal. When I introduced her to the kids, I was nervous. But Lily and Ethan took to her immediately, laughing at her jokes and peppering her with questions about her job. By the end of the night, Lily whispered to me, "I like her, Daddy." My chest swelled with relief and gratitude. As the months passed, my life began to take shape in ways I never expected. The book was set to release in the spring, and early reviews were promising. Kate and I were growing closer, building something that felt real and steady. And the kids? They were happy, thriving, and full of life. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch watching them play in the backyard, Kate joined me, 2 cups of coffee in hand. She handed me one and sat beside me, her smile soft and warm. "You look happy," she said, nudging me gently. "I think I am," I admitted, glancing at the kids. "For the first time in a long time." She reached for my hand, intertwining her fingers with mine. "You deserve it, Mike. All of it." And for the first time I believed her. It was a crisp spring morning when I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside my window. The air smelled fresh, carrying the promise of a new season. The kids were still asleep, and for a rare moment the house was quiet. I lay there for a while, letting the stillness wash over me before heading downstairs to make coffee. Today was special. The release date for my book, Creative Revenge, From Betrayal to Building a New Life, had finally arrived. What had started as a raw blog to process my pain had turned into something so much bigger. The book wasn't just my story anymore. It was a testament to survival, resilience, and the unexpected beauty of rebuilding. I poured myself a cup of coffee and checked my phone. Notifications were already rolling in. Texts from friends, emails from my publisher, and comments from readers who had pre-ordered the book. I scrolled through them, smiling at the kind words and encouragement. As I was sipping my coffee, Ethan bounded into the kitchen, still in his pajamas. "Daddy, is your book out today?" he asked, his eyes wide with excitement. "Yep, it's out today," I said, ruffling his hair. "Can we buy one?" he asked earnestly, as though he hadn't seen the advanced copies stacked on my desk. I laughed. "We already have some, buddy. But if you want, we can go to the bookstore later and see it on the shelf." His face lit up. "Can we, Daddy? Please?" "Of course," I said, my chest tightening with gratitude for how much he cared. Later that day, Kate came over. She'd been my rock through the entire process, from writing the book to navigating the whirlwind of its release. She walked in carrying a bouquet of flowers and a smile that could light up the room. "Happy book release day, author extraordinaire," she said, handing me the flowers. I grinned. "Thanks, Kate. You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," she said simply, leaning in to kiss me. The kids adored her, and it wasn't long before she was in the backyard with them, helping Lily set up her lemonade stand while Ethan chased Bubbles around the yard. Watching her with them filled me with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. That afternoon, we all piled into the car and headed to the local bookstore. The moment we walked in, I spotted my book on a display near the entrance. Seeing it there, my name on the cover, surrounded by other bestsellers, was surreal. "Daddy, look," Ethan said, pointing excitedly. "There it is." Lily ran over, picking up a copy and turning it over to read the back. "This is so cool, Dad," she said, her voice filled with pride. Kate snapped a picture of us standing by the display, her arms slipping around my waist. "You've come a long way, Mike," she said softly, her eyes shining. I nodded, my throat tightening. "Yeah, I guess I have." The next few weeks were a blur of interviews, book signings, and messages from readers. Some shared their own stories of betrayal and rebuilding, while others thanked me for showing them that it was possible to move forward. It was overwhelming at times, but it also felt deeply rewarding. Sarah texted me after the book came out. "Congratulations on the book. I'm glad you found a way to turn everything into something positive." It was a simple message, but it carried weight. I didn't respond right away, unsure of what to say. But later that night I sent back, "Thanks. I hope you're doing well." It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely. But it was a step toward closure. Life with Kate felt easy in a way I hadn't thought possible. She wasn't just my girlfriend, she was my partner, someone who understood me in ways I didn't even know I needed. We took things slow, but it wasn't long before she became a regular part of our lives. The kids adored her, and she treated them with the kind of care and respect that made my heart ache with gratitude. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the kids play, she turned to me and said, "You know, Mike, you've built something really beautiful here. Your kids, your career, your home, it's all a reflection of who you are." I looked at her, my chest tightening. "I couldn't have done it without you, Kate. You were doing it long before I came back," she said, squeezing my hand. "But I'm glad I get to be part of it now." Months turned into a year, and life continued to unfold in ways I never could have predicted. The book became a bestseller, opening doors I hadn't even considered. Speaking engagements, collaborations, even the possibility of a second book. But more importantly, my family was happy. The kids were thriving, Kate and I were growing stronger every day, and the weight of the past no longer felt like a burden. One evening, as we all sat around the dinner table, laughing over some joke Ethan had made, I looked at my family and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Life hadn't turned out the way I'd planned, but maybe that was the point. Sometimes, the most unexpected paths lead to the most beautiful destinations. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, Kate and I sat on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder. She was flipping through the pages of my book, smiling at the parts she recognized from our late-night conversations. "You've really come full circle," she said, closing the book and looking up at me. I nodded, my hand resting on hers. "Yeah. And for the first time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." She smiled, her eyes soft. "You deserve this, Mike. You really do." And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen and I will see you there.